Childhood traumas and mental illnesses are exacerbated by the conditions women face in prison. A 2017 report by the Commission for Gender Equality says mental health issues are prevalent in this group. Why are these prisoners not receiving adequate health care, and how important is it to identify pre-existing problems? We have in our Cape Town studio Nthabiseng Moleko, a commissioner from the Commission for Gender Equality. Here with us, Winnie Siaketso, a medical practitioner with the Department of Correctional Services, and psychiatrist Ryan Fuller with me in the studio. A very warm welcome. Winnie Siaketso, why is it so bad? What is happening in the prisons?
Thank you, Jane. I think the important thing is that it's not only in correctional services. Mental health, as we know, it's a nationwide, in fact not even nationwide, it's a worldwide problem. We have increasing substance use. We have a lot of other influences, a lot of stressors. That is why mental health in general, it's so high. It's not only prevalent to correctional services, it's what is happening in our country. We've seen so many things that are happening in our country. There are a lot of stressors. So mental health, even outside, in the outside population, it's quite high.
Let's zone in on correctional services. I mean, is this just a snapshot then of what's happening outside of prisons? What we've seen there is happening in the rest of the country. Is that what it is, or do you think that the situation in prisons is possibly worse because of what women go through?
I think a bit of both, but it's also a reflection of what is happening in the outside society and in correctional services, because it's, especially for a female, we are more vulnerable, so it's even more stressful. Like, there will be a lot of issues around being a mother in a correctional facility, having left other kids at home, or your life outside. So in most cases, that is a stress itself. So being separated, like when you're separated from your normal environment, that is also a stress itself.
I can imagine. Nthabiseng Moleko, talk us through what you are experiencing, what you know to be happening in these correctional services, and what these women are going through.
Thank you for having me, Jane. The first thing that I just want to share is that we did a study in 2017 as the Commission of Gender Equality, and what we found about women inmates is that the mental condition of the inmates are so profound, and the depression or the likelihood to actually feel isolated and cut off from society worsens already prevailing conditions that are inherited from childhood trauma. So what we find is that there's usually with inmates a root trauma that occurred that was never resolved and never dealt with upon childhood. And this exacerbates in an environment of violence where they then see sexual violence, aggravated violence, conditions of extreme poverty, and those type of conditions worsen one's condition. And so inmates are likely to have had these type of prevailing conditions, and they worsen by being in a delinquent type situation or being put under incarceration. That's number one. And I think that this is then worsened by the condition that you find in our prison system. The first thing is that they need support, and the Department of Correctional Services is supposed to provide adequate support for incarcerated female prisoners. And you find that clinical psychologists or psychologists who are there to enable them to be rehabilitated are actually on the shortfall. So, for instance, in Biza Makata in the Free State, and even in Polsmore, where we did this research, we found that there are 3 psychologists to 698 inmates. This is grossly inadequate. And so it puts us as a society at a problem when they have to be released because they're not rehabilitated. Part of diagnosing the problem will enable them to actually be reintegrated into society.
Okay, let's look at some of those issues that you've raised. Ryan Fuller, I mean, from what you see on a daily basis, I assume, what stands out for you the most when it comes to what these women are experiencing?
Like the previous speakers have mentioned, a massive shortage of services. We simply don't have enough providers. There are chronic lack of psychiatrists and doctors, psychologists, but also occupational therapists. We have virtually no social workers in the community. The psychosocial problems is what drives most of this. Rehabilitating a person, by definition, means putting them back into society, having understood the nature of the problem, and trying to prevent relapsing. That means you need a community psychiatric nurse or a lay worker. Other systems around the world, certainly Britain, has had more time to maybe get it right. Governments had more appetite to put more money in. There are a lot of...
For a moment, what is a social psycho problem? What does that mean?
So psychosocial denotes psycho meaning psychological, or the inner state of a person, whether it's depression, anxiety, psychosis, a person's feelings and how they integrate with themselves, their families, hopefully, and the world around them. Social means outside of a hospital, outside of a prison, in community. We understand that people exist in a system, and we cannot really identify a prisoner or a patient in isolation and expect them to function in a better way if we don't create an environment. One model of care that has worked is called MIDAS, model therapy, creating support around people. This is very important.
So clearly the prison system is not working for these women. Idea that it does make the problem worse.
The doctor has already mentioned, unfortunately it's not only unique to correctional services. There is generally few psychiatrists available. There's, even in the community, they do not have access to psychiatrists. They do not have access to psychological services, even in outside community. But the environment itself becomes a stressor, like I already mentioned. So ideally, housing a person in correctional services, it's a stressor itself. So that is why we're saying there is more need, there is more demand in correctional services, and that's why we strive towards that.
And Thabiso Moleka, does this mean that prisoners, inmates should be assessed before they go in so that problems can be discovered? I don't know if that's even possible or feasible. And if you find out that there is a problem, there is a child problem, there's a problem that could get even worse, that they go somewhere else, that there's another facility that should be able to absorb them.
That's an excellent suggestion. So I think within our prison justice system, budget is an issue. We know that because of the medium-term expenditure framework, we are highly exhausted in terms of resources. We already have inadequate services outside the prison system who need psychological services, and it will be even more difficult for the incarcerated. So I do think we need faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, and NPOs who are able to offer these type of services to really assist our very congested prisons. The issue of overcrowding in prisons really strains the already limited resources, because you'll find that the ratio of prisoners to a clinical psychologist or a social worker is really outweighed. So they cannot even meet the needs of the few that identify a problem. So I think that we need to start looking at having a rehabilitative model in our prisons. We must have prisoners that we look at reintegrating into society. We must be able to care for our people who are in prison, who show the need and are taken care of. Because remember, they carry this historical trauma, and because it wasn't treated, and likely because of the circumstances of extreme poverty, violence, aggravation of these type of circumstances, it has worsened. Jane, I just want to stress this point. The World Health Organization has reported that 40% of deaths that occur within female prisons are from suicide.
Wow.
Now, this means that depression, loneliness, acute feeling of being isolated, particularly if you are a mother, I know one of the guests has mentioned this, it becomes accentuated. And I think these are some of the things that family, which is the community as well, if one doesn't have family, can actually meet the system halfway. Faith-based organizations can come in. There's lots of prison ministries that come and visit people who don't need to feel isolated and uncared for, because they're not lost to the world. And also Department of Correctional Services training their own officials to care for people, but also to train their social workers and offer these type of services within the constrained budgets that they have. We're well aware that we're operating within very limited budgets going forward. There are austerity measures happening right now, but we've got to look at rights and also help the people who are on the other side, because they are the most vulnerable and they don't have a voice.
And Ryan, it seems that the situation that we're in now, that there's very little chance for these women to be rehabilitated if they can't overcome childhood traumas. I'm wondering how long it could take for rehabilitation to take place if they had everything that is needed and required.
Sure, that's a good question. It depends on the diagnosis and the pathology. So where you have primary psychiatric problems such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe obsessive-compulsive disorder, and severe personality disorder, it must be said that many of the prisoners do have personality disorders, whether it's antisocial, dissocial. There, the prognosis is not so good. But it must also be said that many prisoners are not necessarily rightfully detained, shall I say. That was certainly our experience in Sterkfontein. Many of the patients that we assessed that were incarcerated had not yet been convicted. And so there was a backlog of a whole cohort of prisoners who were serving time, sometimes many years, without any firm conviction or sentence. Trying to then, to answer your question, help them have a sense of hope is very, very difficult. I just, as a thought, I know in America, public-private partnerships come on board, and it might be that you could find work-based programs for patients that don't have the most severe mental illnesses. Depression doesn't have to be the most severe illness. There we need access to antidepressants.
But you would think that it shouldn't be up to other organizations, right? It should be happening in-house.
I don't think that's going to happen. I think, to your earlier point, I think prisons tend to mirror society's problems. They amplify them. I think we need organizations, non-governmental organizations, to help take the lead.
And it's not only in prisons, is it? I mean, when these women leave, there's a real stigma attached, and they feel, I gather, more responsible than men who go to prison.
Yes. Yeah. I think that is also quite important. The stigma, as an ex-offender, that, especially as a female, that remains with you for a very long time. So that is why it's important that these patients are rehabilitated. And I must say, in correctional services, there are facilities where, like, we have social workers, psychologists, and medical practitioners who are offering those services. Though we're striving for the best to rehabilitate, and without the support of the family, involvement of the family and everybody, the community at large, correctional services alone cannot win. So that is why we need all the support, everyone, Department of Health, other intersectoral department to assist, because, like Jabisa mentioned, it's mainly childhood. These are things that started childhood. By the time an offender comes to correctional, an inmate comes to correctional services, it's usually too late. So that is why we should look at other preventative measures, looking at the community, looking at strengthening the family unit and supporting each other, and going back to those basics where people would support each other and working towards a common goal in achieving it.
Ms. Moleko, has a call been put out for more correctionals, or not correctional services, for more facilities to deal with these patients who are going through this mental trauma, this mental illness? And should these facilities operate differently to prisons, in the sense that, I don't know, that there's a rampant substance abuse because women are not allowed to smoke their cigarettes, so they need this as a sort of replacement? Do we need to see all sorts of levels of change here?
Yes, Jane. I think that we definitely need to look at alternative ways to solve this problem. So we cannot run away that the Department of Correctional Services is mandated as a public entity to look at this issue. I think that South Africa is signatory to many rules, the Bangkok rules, you know, the Human Rights Declaration of the UN. We have our own constitution. But I think rights go hand in hand with responsibility. So we understand that as a society and an individual in a society, there's certain rules and frameworks within which you act, and if you go beyond that, justice must take its course, and you'll be found wanting and you'll be incarcerated, which is why you're in prison in the first place. But I think that the issue of shame that was mentioned in the first instance is because
it does come upon one that, especially as a woman, it's aggravated because of the type of society we're in. As a woman, if you commit a crime and you are found wanting, there's a great deal of shame that usually comes upon one. This has been researched, primarily because you're a woman, also primarily because you might be a mother. So you leave your children and you are uncertain as to the conditions that you are leaving them to. Who's looking after them? So I think that these issues are all interlinked. The substance abuse issue is quite pivotal because it's also linked to crime, either because you are committing it because you're high on a substance or you're addicted and it causes you to do criminal activities to finance those type of addictive substances that you are reliant on, or because you are linked to highly criminal type network that causes you to then interact with this type of activity. So I think these things are interlinked, and I think it's a societal issue. My proposing recommendations would be, one, we've got to, as a society, look at preventing these things. The Department of Correctional Services, even the government, does not have the resources to deal adequately with all incarcerated
I
individuals.
suppose, may I just jump in here?
Families and communities must visit their loved ones.
Yeah, and can I just jump in, Ryan? I mean, in an ideal world, I guess it would be powerful to identify children when they are young with problems and be able to sort it out then, which obviously is incredibly hard considering the sort of community and background they come from.
For sure.
Because you're removing all these women from society and from their families.
Absolutely. I think, going back, if you took substance disorders, drugs and alcohol, as one of the sort of emblems to try and target, that would go a long way. We know in a lot of schools that substance disorders are rampant. Not so long ago, alcohol and maybe cannabis used to be sort of most severe. Nowadays, the type of drugs and designer drugs that are coming through most schools are really, really hectic. There's a perception amongst a lot of children, especially with social media, that it's quite cool to use drugs, to go out, and we have to keep pace with innovative things like Uber. Has been unbelievably damaging, where suddenly a child who doesn't need a driving license can cruise around a major city and get access to substances. So those are the sort of things, but that technology we can also use in a good way, where we can track people in a slightly better system. I support what the previous speakers are saying, and I think public-private work could target, for example, educational drives at schools, where we have I'm in private practice, we're looking at going to government schools to give educational talks, to basically say all is not lost, there is hope out there. And then again, like was earlier mentioned, I think non-governmental organizations, faith-based, must come on board. I think that's important. Yeah.
Right, all three of you, thank you very much. Ryan Fuller, Winnie Siaketso, and Sabeng Moleko, thank you. Still ahead, can justice still be served more than 100 years after the crime?